In the quiet, picturesque town of Willow Creek, life moved at a gentle pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, and every house had its own unique charm. Among these homes stood Sarah Thompson's cozy cottage, tucked away on a cul-de-sac surrounded by towering oak trees. For years, Sarah had taken pride in her backyard, a lush haven filled with vibrant flowers, fruit trees heavy with apples and oranges, and a small vegetable patch where she grew tomatoes and herbs. It was more than just a yard. It was her sanctuary, her escape from the world's chaos. Every morning, Sarah would sip her coffee on the back porch, listening to birds chirping as sunlight filtered through the leaves. She loved watching squirrels scamper up tree trunks and butterflies flit between blossoms. Her neighbors often joked that her garden looked like something out of a magazine, but Sarah didn't care about appearances. It was her happy place. She spent countless hours tending to it, nurturing each plant like it was part of her family. But one crisp autumn morning, everything changed. As Sarah watered her roses, she noticed a white envelope sticking out of her mailbox. Curious, she wiped her hands on her jeans and opened it. Inside was a formal letter from the Homeowners Association, HOA, informing residents of an upcoming project, a zipline connecting two parks within the community. At first glance, it sounded harmless enough, a fun attraction for kids and families. But then Sarah read the fine print. The zipline would run directly over several backyards, including hers. Her heart sank. How could they do this? Who even thought of putting a zipline over people's private properties? Sarah felt anger bubbling inside her, but she tried to stay calm. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. That evening, she attended a neighborhood meeting called by the HOA to discuss the plans. Armed with questions and concerns, Sarah hoped to find answers, or at least a way to stop them from ruining her beloved garden. At the meeting, the HOA representative presented glossy renderings of the proposed zipline. "This will boost property values," he said confidently, pointing to slides showing smiling children soaring through the air. But when Sarah raised her hand to ask about privacy and noise, the room fell silent. The representative brushed off her concerns, saying the zipline would be barely noticeable. Barely noticeable. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Over the next few weeks, construction began despite mounting protests from Sarah and a handful of other homeowners. Cranes rolled in, and steel poles rose high into the sky, casting long shadows across Sarah's once sunny garden. Workers hammered and drilled, drowning out the soothing sounds of nature. By the time the zipline was complete, Sarah's sanctuary felt like a war zone. Gone were the peaceful mornings and serene afternoons. Instead, strangers zipped past her windows, laughing and shouting as if her backyard was now public property. Sarah sat on her porch one evening, staring at the monstrous structure looming above her garden. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how powerless she felt. They had taken something precious from her without so much as a second thought. But deep down, a spark of defiance ignited. If the HOA wouldn't listen to reason, maybe it was time to show them exactly how disruptive their zipline really was. Little did anyone know, Sarah's quiet determination was about to turn into something far bigger and far more creative than anyone expected. The zipline's grand opening arrived sooner than Sarah had hoped. Bright banners fluttered in the breeze, and local families gathered to celebrate what the HOA called a new era of community fun. Children giggled as they climbed into harnesses, while parents snapped photos and cheered them on. But for Sarah, the scene was anything but joyful. From her kitchen window, she watched as the first riders zipped past her backyard, their laughter echoing through the air like an unwelcome intrusion. At first, Sarah tried to ignore it. She closed her curtains, turned up the volume on her radio, and focused on tending to her garden. But no matter how hard she tried, there was no escaping the constant noise. The metallic hum of the zipline cables vibrated through the ground, making her teacups rattle on the counter. Every few minutes, another rider would zoom by, their shouts piercing the silence that Sarah once cherished. Her sanctuary had become a circus, and she was trapped in the middle of it. Determined to fight back, Sarah decided to confront the HOA again. She typed out a polite yet firm email detailing the disruption caused by the zipline, how it ruined her peace, invaded her privacy, and even scared away the wildlife she loved so much. To her dismay, the response was dismissive. "We understand your concerns," the HOA wrote, "but the zipline is for the greater good of the community. We're confident you'll adjust over time." Adjust. Sarah couldn't believe what she was reading. Adjust to strangers flying over her property. Adjust to losing the one place where she felt truly at ease. The injustice of it all gnawed at her, fueling a growing sense of outrage. She wasn't just upset anymore. She was angry. Angry at the HOA for ignoring her pleas, angry at the neighbors who seemed indifferent, and most of all, angry at herself for not stopping this earlier. One afternoon, as Sarah sat fuming on her porch, she noticed something peculiar. A group of teenagers using the zipline began screaming, not out of excitement, but fear. One of the riders had lost their grip mid-flight and dangled precariously above someone's fence until staff rushed to help. It was chaotic, embarrassing, and downright dangerous. Yet instead of shutting down the zipline, the HOA simply posted signs reminding users to hold on tight. Watching the commotion unfold, an idea sparked in Sarah's mind. If the HOA refused to take her complaints seriously, maybe she could make them regret their decision. After all, if they weren't going to listen to reason, perhaps they'd respond to action. Sarah grinned to herself, already imagining the possibilities. What if she could turn the tables and make the zipline experience so unpleasant that no one would want to use it? That night, Sarah stayed up late, scrolling through websites and brainstorming ways to reclaim her peace. She stumbled across videos of industrial wind machines used in movies to create hurricane-like conditions. They were loud, powerful, and capable of generating winds strong enough to shake entire sets. Sarah leaned closer to her screen, her eyes narrowing with determination. If the HOA thought they could invade her space without consequences, they were about to learn otherwise. By morning, Sarah had made up her mind. She wouldn't sit idly by while her life was turned upside down. With a plan forming in her head, she picked up her phone and started making calls. The HOA might have underestimated her before, but they were about to discover that Sarah Thompson wasn't someone you wanted to cross. And as she placed an order for 3 industrial-grade wind machines, she couldn't help but smile. This was only the beginning. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Sarah. Her mind buzzed with excitement and nerves as she dove headfirst into her plan. She spent hours researching wind machines, comparing models, reading reviews, and watching videos to understand how they worked. The more she learned, the more confident she became. These machines weren't just tools. They were her ticket to reclaiming her backyard and teaching the HOA a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. After settling on 3 high-powered industrial fans, Sarah placed her order online. To avoid suspicion, she listed them as garden ventilation equipment when filling out the delivery form. When the massive crates arrived at her doorstep a week later, her heart raced with anticipation. Neighbors peeked out their windows, curious about the strange delivery, but Sarah simply smiled and waved. Let them wonder, she thought. They'll know soon enough. Assembling the machines wasn't easy. The instruction manual was filled with technical jargon that made Sarah's head spin, and the pieces were heavier than she expected. But she refused to give up. With grit and determination, she hauled the components into her backyard, one by one, and pieced them together like a giant puzzle. By the time the last bolt was tightened, sweat dripped down her face, but she felt a surge of pride. There they stood, 3 towering wind machines, strategically positioned around her property, their nozzles aimed directly at the zipline cables. Sarah stepped back to admire her handiwork. The machines looked almost comical in her otherwise serene garden, like something out of a sci-fi movie. But she didn't care. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about sending a message. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, she was ready to meet them on the field. And win. To test her setup, Sarah flipped the switch on one machine. A deafening roar erupted as a powerful gust of wind shot through the air. Leaves swirled in chaotic spirals, and the zipline cable above her yard began to sway violently. Sarah grinned, feeling a thrill of satisfaction. She turned off the machine and tested the others, adjusting their angles until each one targeted a different section of the zipline. By the time she finished, she knew exactly how to create maximum disruption. That evening, Sarah sat on her porch, sipping tea and imagining the chaos her little invention would unleash. She pictured riders gripping their harnesses tightly as the cables shook beneath them, their laughter turning into shrieks of panic. Would they scream? Probably. Would they complain to the HOA? Absolutely. And best of all, would the HOA finally realize the error of their ways? Sarah certainly hoped so. But even as she plotted her next move, a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. Was this really the right thing to do? What if people got hurt? What if the HOA retaliated? Sarah pushed those thoughts aside. She had tried reasoning with them, tried being polite, and look where that had gotten her. No, this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. If shaking a few cables was what it took to protect her home, then so be it. The following morning, Sarah woke up early, her stomach fluttering with nervous energy. Today was the day. She walked outside, took a deep breath, and flipped the switches on all three machines. Within seconds, artificial winds roared to life, rattling the zipline and sending shockwaves through the neighborhood. From her porch, Sarah watched as the first unsuspecting rider approached, and then froze midair as the cable beneath them began to tremble uncontrollably. Her lips curled into a satisfied smile. Game on. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that usually brought smiles to everyone's faces. But for Sarah, it was the perfect opportunity to put her plan into action. She sipped her coffee on the porch, watching as families gathered near the zipline station, eager to enjoy a fun weekend activity. Children giggled while parents helped them strap into harnesses, oblivious to what awaited them in the skies above Sarah's backyard. With a deep breath, Sarah flipped the switches on her wind machines. The quiet hum of the neighborhood was instantly shattered by a deafening roar as powerful gusts of wind blasted through the air. Leaves spiraled wildly, flower pots toppled over, and the zipline cables began to sway violently. Riders who had been gliding smoothly just moments before suddenly found themselves jerking back and forth, their screams cutting through the chaos. The first victim of Sarah's windstorm was a teenage boy who froze mid-flight, his knuckles white as he clung to the harness. "What's happening?" he shouted, his voice trembling with panic. Below him, parents gasped and pointed at the swaying cable, unsure whether to laugh or run for help. One mother frantically waved her arms, yelling, "Stop the ride! Stop it now!" The operator at the control panel scrambled to halt the system, but the relentless winds made it impossible to stabilize the line. As more riders experienced the turbulent journey, complaints poured in thick and fast. A group of kids refused to get off the platform after seeing their friends struggle against the shaking cables. Parents demanded refunds, and some even threatened to call the authorities. The once cheerful atmosphere turned into a scene of confusion and frustration. Meanwhile, Sarah sat calmly on her porch, pretending to read a book while secretly enjoying every moment of the pandemonium she had unleashed. Word of the bizarre incident spread quickly. By noon, the HOA representative arrived, looking flustered and out of breath. He marched straight to Sarah's house, his face red with anger. "What is going on here?" he demanded, gesturing toward the zipline. Sarah looked up innocently, feigning surprise. "Oh dear, I'm not sure," she said sweetly. "It seems like there's quite a strong breeze today." The man narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Strong breeze? This isn't natural wind, Sarah. We know you're behind this." Sarah shrugged nonchalantly. "I don't know what you mean. Those machines in my yard are just for garden ventilation. Surely you can't blame me for Mother Nature acting up." Fuming but unable to prove anything, The HOA representative stormed off to assess the damage. Back at the Zipline station, workers struggled to restart the ride, only for it to shut down again moments later due to the relentless shaking. Riders continued to scream, and frustrated parents began leaving in droves. By late afternoon, the entire operation ground to a halt, much to Sarah's delight. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah strolled through her garden, admiring the stillness that had returned. The wind machines were silent now, their job done for the day. She couldn't help but chuckle as she imagined the HOA's frantic meetings and panicked phone calls. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of control and justice. They had invaded her space. Now they knew what it felt like to have their plans disrupted. But Sarah also knew this was far from over. As satisfying as today's victory had been, she braced herself for the inevitable backlash. The HOA wouldn't take this lying down, and she needed to be ready for whatever came next. Still, as she settled into her porch chair with a cup of tea, she allowed herself a small smile. Round one went to her, and she wasn't done yet. The fallout from Sarah's wind machine stunt was swift and intense. By Monday morning, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Neighbors who had previously stayed neutral in the Zipline debate now took sides, some siding with Sarah for standing up to the HOA, while others condemned her actions as reckless and disruptive. The HOA wasted no time retaliating, determined to put an end to what they called Sarah's campaign of harassment. Early that week, a crew arrived at Sarah's house under the watchful eyes of curious onlookers. Without warning, the HOA installed floodlights along the Zipline route, bright industrial-grade lamps that bathed Sarah's backyard in harsh, unrelenting light. Night fell, but Sarah's once peaceful garden remained bathed in an artificial glow so intense it felt like daylight. Sleep became impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, the glare seeped through her curtains, mocking her attempts to find rest. Sarah gritted her teeth, refusing to let them win. If the HOA wanted to escalate things, she was more than ready to match their moves. She spent the next day upgrading her setup, purchasing water misters designed for outdoor cooling systems. These devices could spray fine droplets of water into the air, creating a dense fog that would drench anyone unlucky enough to be using the Zipline. With grim determination, she mounted the misters near the wind machines, ensuring they were angled perfectly to target the riders. On Wednesday evening, Sarah flipped the switches again. This time, not only did the wind machines roar to life, but the misters began spraying clouds of water into the air. Within minutes, the Zipline cables were slick with moisture, and riders found themselves soaked to the bone as they zoomed, or rather, shakily wobbled, through the artificial storm. Screams of panic turned into shouts of frustration as people realized they weren't just being jostled by wind. They were getting drenched too. Parents dragged their crying children off the platform, demanding answers. One man stormed up to the HOA representative, his shirt dripping wet. "What kind of death trap is this?" he yelled, gesturing wildly at the swaying, rain-soaked Zipline. Others joined in, their voices rising in anger. The HOA staff scrambled to defend themselves, but their explanations sounded hollow even to their own ears. Meanwhile, Sarah watched the chaos unfold from her porch, sipping tea with a satisfied smirk. She knew exactly how ridiculous the situation looked. A Zipline meant to bring joy now reduced to a soggy, terrifying ordeal. But beneath her triumph, a small part of her wondered if she'd gone too far. Was this really the best way to resolve things? Could there be another solution? As the days passed, tensions in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. Arguments broke out between neighbors, dividing the community into factions. Some supported Sarah, applauding her creativity and courage in standing up to the HOA. Others saw her actions as selfish and disruptive, claiming she was making life harder for everyone. Friendships strained, and once friendly streets grew tense with hostility. One afternoon, a group of angry residents confronted Sarah in her driveway. "You're ruining everything," one woman shouted, pointing a finger at her. Do you think this is funny? People are miserable because of you." Sarah stood her ground, though her hands trembled slightly. "I didn't ask for any of this," she replied firmly. "If the HOA hadn't ignored us from the start, none of this would have happened." The confrontation ended in a stalemate, leaving both sides angrier than before. That night, Sarah sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the glowing lights outside her window. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Was she winning the battle but losing the war? Her backyard might have been reclaimed temporarily, but at what cost? The neighborhood she loved, the one she'd fought so hard to protect, was fracturing right before her eyes. Despite her misgivings, Sarah refused to back down. The HOA had started this fight, and she was determined to finish it. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had to give. And soon, the battle between Sarah and the HOA had turned Willow Creek into a battleground, with tensions simmering just below the surface. The once peaceful neighborhood now felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Conversations at the local coffee shop revolved around whose side people were on, Sarah's or the HOA's. Some neighbors admired her boldness, whispering that she was fighting the good fight, while others muttered about how selfish and disruptive she was being. It seemed everyone had an opinion, and no one could agree. The tipping point came when a local news crew arrived in Willow Creek, tipped off by someone who thought the feud would make for great television. Reporters set up cameras near Sarah's house, interviewing residents and capturing footage of the infamous Zipline. They spoke to angry parents, frustrated HOA members, and even a few brave souls defending Sarah's actions. The story quickly spread online, turning Sarah's backyard into a national talking point. Headlines like "Homeowner versus HOA," "The Zipline Wars" dominated social media feeds, sparking debates far beyond Willow Creek. Amid the chaos, tempers flared during a heated town hall meeting called by the HOA to address the growing unrest. The room was packed, some attendees clutching signs supporting Sarah, others waving papers demanding her wind machines and misters be removed immediately. When Sarah walked in, whispers rippled through the crowd. She took a seat near the front, her jaw set firmly, prepared for whatever came next. The meeting started with a presentation from the HOA representative, who tried to paint Sarah as unreasonable and dangerous. "This isn't just about one homeowner anymore," he said, his voice rising. "It's about safety, property values, and respecting our community rules." His words were met with boos from Sarah's supporters and cheers from her opponents. The moderator struggled to maintain order as arguments broke out across the room. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood calmly, holding up a hand to silence the noise. "I didn't ask for any of this," she began, her voice steady. "All I wanted was peace in my own backyard. But when no one listened, not the HOA, not the city, I had to take matters into my own hands. You built something over my home without my consent. Now you know what it feels like to lose control of your space." Her speech drew applause from some corners of the room, but others shouted back, accusing her of escalating the conflict unnecessarily. One man stood up, red-faced, and accused her of ruining family fun. Another woman chimed in, saying Sarah's actions proved she cared more about herself than the community. The shouting grew louder until the moderator finally called for a recess, unable to restore order. As the meeting dragged on, it became clear that neither side was willing to budge. The HOA insisted the Zipline stayed because it benefited the majority, while Sarah argued they were trampling individual rights. Exhaustion settled over the room, but the divide remained as wide as ever. Outside, reporters captured every dramatic moment, broadcasting clips of raised voices, tearful pleas, and accusations flying back and forth. Willow Creek had become a spectacle, its residents pitted against each other in a fight that seemed impossible to resolve. Sarah left the meeting feeling drained but resolute. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, constantly battling her neighbors and fighting the HOA. But she also refused to surrender. That night, as she sat alone in her dimly lit kitchen, Sarah stared out at the glowing floodlights still shining over her garden. For the first time, she wondered if there might be another way forward, a solution that didn't involve revenge or retaliation. But after everything that had happened, finding common ground felt like trying to cross an endless chasm. Still, deep down, she hoped there was a chance for her neighbors, and for the peaceful life she longed to reclaim. Just when it seemed like the chaos in Willow Creek would never end, an unexpected twist changed everything. A local environmental group, inspired by the national attention Sarah's story had garnered, decided to investigate the zipline's impact on the neighborhood. What they discovered was startling. The construction and operation of the zipline had disrupted local wildlife habitats, disturbing birds, squirrels, and other creatures that once thrived in the area. Their report included photos of empty nests, displaced animals, and trees damaged during installation. The findings caught the eye of city officials, who stepped in to mediate the escalating feud. City representatives called for an emergency meeting with both Sarah and the HOA. The mood was tense as everyone gathered around the table, ready for yet another battle. But this time, something felt different. Instead of pointing fingers or shouting accusations, the mediator encouraged open dialogue. For the first time in weeks, people listened, not just to argue, but to understand. Sarah spoke first, her voice calm but firm. She explained how the zipline had invaded her privacy, destroyed her peace, and turned her cherished backyard into a public spectacle. Her words weren't filled with anger this time. Instead, she focused on what she had lost and why she felt compelled to fight back. To her surprise, some members of the HOA nodded sympathetically. One woman even admitted, "I can see now why you were so upset. We should have done more to consider your feelings before moving forward." The HOA representative, though initially defensive, eventually acknowledged their mistakes. "We thought we were doing something good for the community," he said, looking genuinely remorseful. "But we didn't realize how much harm we were causing to individuals like Sarah, or to the environment." The admission was small, but it carried weight. It opened the door to compromise. After hours of discussion, a solution emerged. The HOA agreed to dismantle the existing zipline and reroute it away from residential areas, ensuring it no longer passed over private properties. In return, Sarah promised to remove her wind machines and water misters, restoring normalcy to the neighborhood. Both sides reluctantly accepted the terms, knowing it was the only way to move forward. As the agreement took shape, the atmosphere shifted. Neighbors who had been divided began talking again, tentatively at first, but soon with genuine warmth. Some even approached Sarah afterward, apologizing for doubting her intentions and thanking her for standing up against the HOA. Though relationships wouldn't heal overnight, the cracks in the community started to mend. In the weeks that followed, crews dismantled the floodlights and removed the towering poles that had loomed over Sarah's garden. The zipline cables disappeared, leaving behind clear skies and quiet mornings. Sarah spent her days replanting flowers trampled during the ordeal and tending to her fruit trees, which showed signs of new growth. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least a version of normal closer to what she'd always cherished. One evening, as Sarah sat on her porch watching fireflies dance through the dusk, she reflected on everything that had happened. The fight had been exhausting, messy, and at times overwhelming, but it had also taught her something valuable. Sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't about winning. It's about finding balance. By refusing to back down, she had forced the HOA to listen, not just to her, but to the entire community. And while the scars of the conflict would linger, so too would the lessons learned. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, and neither was Sarah. But as she sipped her tea under the stars, surrounded by the sounds of crickets chirping and leaves rustling softly in the breeze, she allowed herself a moment of peace. Her backyard was hers again, a sanctuary reclaimed not through revenge, but through resilience. And though she knew life might throw challenges her way again, she felt ready to face them, one step at a time.